Today I'm going to show you one of my absolute favorite toy cameras ever. It is the Lomography Supersampler. This camera is tons of fun to use, and in this video I'm going to talk about its features, how to use it, and I'll show you some example photos I've taken with it. Designed and manufactured by Lomography, the Supersampler was released in the year 2000, just 2 years after their Action Sampler camera came out. Now, both the Action Sampler camera and the Supersampler have something in common. They are both multi-lens cameras and they both have 4 lenses. Where they differ, however, is that the Action Sampler has its 4 lenses arranged in a rectangle, and on each frame of 35mm film, you have one image from each of those lenses in each quadrant of the image. The Supersampler, however, has 4 24mm lenses on the front of the camera, all in a row. And what this means is that every time you press the shutter button, you get 4 panoramas on one frame of 35mm film. So Lomography took the multi-lens approach to toy cameras and gave it a new twist with these panoramas, which is absolute genius. Now, when this camera was released in the year 2000, Lomography dubbed it the Queen of Multi-Lens Cameras, which kind of raises more questions than it answers. Because if this is the Queen of Multi-Lens Cameras, then what is the King of Multi-Lens Cameras? Is it the Action Sampler? Is it the Renchicardia? Who knows? The Supersampler came in a myriad of colors and textures, including rubberized black, red, pearly blue, shiny silver, and there was even limited editions of the camera. So let's talk through some of the features of the Lomography Supersampler. It takes any kind of 35mm film. So you can use black and white film, you can use color slide film. I always use color negative film though, for one very simple reason. I mean, firstly, I love color negative film, but secondly, when you're shooting with a toy camera, it's very hard to nail exposure because they have set apertures and a set shutter speed. So if you're using color negative film is very forgiving, and if you underexpose the image by a stop or you overexpose it by a stop or two, it's all good. You're going to get a usable image. So that's why I always use color negative film with toy cameras. Now, the Supersampler has 4 24mm lenses on the front of the camera. On Lomography's website, they describe these as razor sharp Japanese lenses. I'm not sure razor sharp is exactly the term I would use. It probably sounds a bit more like marketing spiel to me, but the lenses are fine for a toy camera. It gives some really good results. Now, those lenses have a set aperture of f11, and when you press the shutter button, it has a set shutter speed for each of the lenses of 1/100th of a second. So that's what you're working with. Aperture f11 and the shutter speed at 1/100th of a second. Now, when you press the shutter button, all 4 lenses fire one after the other. Okay, so they don't fire all at the same time, they fire in a sequence. Now, the one thing that you can control is how fast that sequence of 4 images gets fired off. There's a little switch there on the back of the camera, and you can either set it to fast or slow. Now, if you set it to the fast setting, all 4 images will fire off in 200 milliseconds, which is 1/5 of a second. However, if you put it on the slow setting, all 4 images will fire off in 2 seconds, so that's half a second apart. So there is quite a good difference there in the 2 speeds you have at how fast those sequence of images does get fired off for the Supersampler. Now, I must admit that the button on the back of the camera, the fast slow button, isn't actually labeled. I kind of forgot what it was and which way it went, so I just started taking all my photos with the switch set to one position, which turned out to be the fast position. And for most of the images, it didn't actually matter. I was taking images of landscapes, and yeah, they just come out in a nice sort of sequence of images there together. So the lenses on the Supersampler have a fixed focus. So everything from 30 centimeters, 1 foot to infinity is going to be in focus, which is good news. So you just got to remember not to get your subject too close to the camera, and then you're fine. Just keep shooting. Now, because there is a set aperture of f11 and a set shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, your choice of film speed becomes very important, and you really need to match your film speed with the conditions you're shooting in. Now, on Lomography's website from the year 2000, they recommend 800 speed film. However, 24 years later, a quarter of a century almost later, 800 speed film is expensive these days. So usually I use ISO 200 or ISO 400 film, and I make sure that I shoot in bright conditions, and I've always had good results. So we've spoken about some of the features of the Supersampler. Let's talk about what it doesn't have. It doesn't have a viewfinder, it doesn't have a flash, it doesn't need a battery. This is a very low maintenance camera and it's very light and compact. You can just grab a roll of film, grab the Supersampler, put that in your camera bag, and in your camera bag you've got an extra option to take some fun pictures when you're out and about. So this is why I love it. It is super cool. Even though the Lomography Supersampler is a pretty basic camera, it does have one super cool thing. It has a ripcord film advance. No, I'm not kidding. Every time you take a shot, to advance the film to the next frame, you have to pull the ripcord. I think this is the only camera I've ever seen or heard of that has a ripcord film advance. Now, just a little side story about ripcords. I grew up in the 1980s, and on a Saturday morning I used to watch the cartoons on TV while I was eating my cereal, and they always used to have, Hanna-Barbera cartoons on a Saturday morning, and one of the stars of that series was Huckleberry Hound. And there was one little bit of Huckleberry Hound they always used to play, and it's when he went on his first parachute jump, and he's standing there and he says, "I'm going for my first parachute jump. All I gotta do is count to 3 and pull the ripcord. A 1, a 2, a 3. So every time I hear the word ripcord, that's what I think of. I think of Huckleberry Hound, and funnily enough, my Supersampler is blue, just like Huckleberry Hound. Now, there is another nifty feature about the ripcord film advance, is that when the film is not advanced, there's a little window here with a red dot in. That means it's not ready to shoot. You need to advance the film. And then when you pull the ripcord, that little red circle in the window there will turn to green, so you know that you're ready to take a shot. Then when you press the shutter button, it'll go back to red. So that's a really nifty system. If you can't remember if you've advanced the film or not, you just need to look at that window. It's very well designed. Now, the ripcord, as cool as it is, it's super fun to use. I think, however, you do have to be a little bit careful about pulling it. Don't yank it, don't pull it too hard, because I think, these could be a little bit delicate. I mean, mine's lasted pretty well so far, but I'm certainly not gonna, yank it like I'm trying to start up a mower or anything like that, because I think it would break if you're too rough with it. So using the Lomography Supersampler is a ton of fun. Like I said, I throw it in my bag with a roll of film and you're good to go. You don't need to have a battery, you just load the film up and you're shooting. It's fantastic. I do find loading the film is a little bit tricky. The last roll I shot in Indonesia, I was on Padar Island and it was very hot and humid, and I hadn't loaded the film in advance of taking any photos, which is a bit silly. And I stood on Padar Island with the sun beating down and all of my family walked back to the boat, and I was trying to load the film in this camera. It took me about 5 or 6 minutes, but I finally did it. I bought my Lomography Supersampler from a guy on Facebook Marketplace around 7 or 8 years ago. He had a big box of lomography cameras he was getting rid of dirt cheap, and I bought them all. And so it was really cool. A lot of them came fully boxed with all the manuals and stuff like that. So let's take a look at what you used to get when you bought a Lomography Supersampler straight off the shelf back in the year 2000. So here is the box here. I've got to say it's really well branded. I really like it. It's really quirky. It's got the camera there on the front with a cool sort of series of circles, and it's got the word Supersampler. When you open it up, you can sort of see the Supersampler inside. And then on the left-hand side there, you can see all these, example images taken with the Supersampler, which I think is really, really cool. On the back of the box, it has the original Australian price tag of $98, which is probably, 65, 70 US dollars. So that's probably how much they cost originally back 24 years ago. If you were to buy one off Lomography or buy one in a shop, they're around that 65 US dollar mark. The camera came in this kind of plastic case inside the box, which is pretty cool. I'm not sure a camera would be sold like that these days. I think we're a little bit more environmentally conscious of producing waste and packaging and stuff like that. However, I do really like how this is boxed. It does look very cool. There were 2 little books that came with the Supersampler. You've got this one here, which is fantastic. This is just like basically examples of how to use the Supersampler, which I think is wonderful. It's always good when you get a toy camera, and Lomography are very good at this. They sell their toy cameras usually with example books of images, which is fantastic for inspiration. I think it's wonderful. Also in this book, there is a history of lomography, which is super cool. And it's just all little bits of text about the Supersampler and, making your own micro action film and all cool stuff like this. So yeah, it is full of inspo. I really, really love this Supersampler book. The second little booklet it came with is an instruction manual in different languages. And again, this is very well thought out. There's a gatefold sleeve here at the front with lots of examples, and all of the parts of the Supersampler are labeled, and the instructions for use are there. So now I'm going to talk you through some images that I've shot with the Lomography Supersampler over the years, and I'm going to start with my latest roll I shot a couple of weeks ago in Indonesia. So I was on Padar Island, which is in Komodo National Park. I took my Lomography Supersampler along with me on this day trip to Komodo National Park, and the first stop we're at Padar Island, a gorgeous, gorgeous place. The sun is beating down, it's hot, it's humid. I hadn't preloaded my roll of film in my Supersampler, and as I said earlier, yeah, it took me 5 or 6 minutes to load the film up. I finally got it though. I was about to give up, but I'm glad I didn't. And this is the first image here. Look at this, a beautiful bit of frame burn there. And there's just, 2 and a bit frames of Padar Island there. And I really like this. I think it looks fantastic. The next one, however, I knew that the first image might have a bit of frame burn, so I took another one here. And again, you've got Padar Island here, looking out here, and you see the islands and the sea and the grass here in the foreground. Really love this. I think it looks fantastic. A few sort of light leaks there at the top of the frame, which is pretty cool. The next image here, you have a few more light leaks, which is really curious. But yeah, I do really like it. It sort of adds to the lo-fi aesthetic of the images. And yeah, you can see here that I've shot this image, with the panoramas going vertical. And you see this little slice of Padar Island here and this beautiful bay in the water. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. There's a couple more here, just different aspects of Padar Island. And you can see that the exposure is pretty good. It's f11, it's 1/100th of a second, ISO 200. I'm shooting in bright conditions, and yeah, these images look really good. So for those first few images, of course, I was holding the camera like this and getting 4 vertical panoramas across the image. However, for the next stop on the day trip, we went to a place called Pink Beach, which is also on Padar Island, funnily enough. It's kind of around the corner, 10 minutes by boat. And I took the first image at Pink Beach with the camera like this. And as you can see, there are 4 horizontal panoramas there, one on top of each other. So that's the really cool thing about this camera. You can take vertical panoramas or horizontal ones. It's really up to you how you use the camera. So the next one at Pink Beach here is with the camera the other way, and I really like this. You've got a bit of a hill here and this beautiful sort of pink beach and blue water. But for the next couple of images, I turned it back around the other way, and as you can see here, this is another really much better framed image of Pink Beach actually. Somehow I managed to get more of the hill and the sea and the beach in this one, so this one looks much better. And along the Pink Beach, there was a whole load of little shacks where the locals were selling food and drinks and stuff like that. So this is one of the little shacks there that was selling food and drink. So I managed to get that pretty well in the frame there. I'm pretty happy with that one. The next few images were taken on Komodo Island. We went to Komodo Island to see the Komodo dragon, the world's biggest lizard, which is kind of, it can actually kill people, this thing. It was fascinating, but unfortunately there are no Komodo dragon pictures with the Supersampler. However, I did get this image of one of the jetties on Komodo Island. I really like this. I seem to have somehow, just by fluke, got the jetty right in the middle of these panoramas, so that looks absolutely fantastic. Now, one thing to talk about, of course, with each of the images here, they're separated by sort of a black line, so I really like that. It sort of adds, again, to the lo-fi aesthetic of using this camera. But as you can see here, and in also some of the other images, there is a bit of a vignette around the corners of some of the images, which again, I like, and quite often you will see with toy cameras. But the colors look nice and bright and punchy, and yeah, I really do like the look of these lenses that the Supersampler has. If you're enjoying this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. And I'd also love it if you subscribe to my newsletter, mattlovescameras.substack.com. I feature images shot with compact film and digital cameras on my Substack, and lots of little travel stories about my photographic adventures. The last 2 images I took on Komodo Island were of this patrol boat. So the first one here, as you can see, I took vertical panoramas, and the patrol boat is kind of cut off there. Probably wasn't quite enough room taking an image like that. And I sort of suspected that at the time. So you can see the next one, I held the camera up like this, and I get 4 beautiful panoramas here of the patrol boat. Not only the patrol boat, but another little white boat there and part of the jetty. So out of those 2, this one here is my favorite. And 2 final images from Indonesia with the Supersampler. This is the speedboat. We went on our Komodo day trip, and here is the engine here, and you can see the wash of all the water we've left behind us there. And this one was back at our beach resort with the beautiful palm tree here, and I was trying to finish off the roll here, and as you can see, there's a nice bit of vignetting in the sky there. Now I'll show you some of my other favorite images with the Supersampler. This first one here is just a local image down at Kapalaba near where I live. It's like of an electricity kind of substation, and I took this photo with the Supersampler, and the sort of the black things down the left part of the frame, I actually thought these were like sprockets when I first saw this image. Of course they're not, there's something to do with electricity, but I really like this, and I think this is a really great example of where using the Supersampler, you have these repeating patterns with the Supersampler, and I think it looks really cool. This next image is at dusk. This is the Grand Hotel in Cleveland. I really like this. This is a subject that I shoot quite often. And yeah, I really like this here on the Supersampler. It looks kind of mysterious, doesn't it? The next one is another one of my photographic muses. This is Graham's Discount Tires. If you've watched his channel before, you definitely will have seen this building before. And somehow I managed to nail Graham's Discount Tires right in the middle of the Supersampler frame there, and you've got this beautiful blue sky sort of graduating from light blue up to dark blue at the top there with quite a heavy vignette. The next few images were taken at the Ekka. That is the Royal Queensland Show. It's like a big carnival fun fair, that kind of thing, and you've got some photos here of one of the rides, and it's done a really great job here, the Supersampler. The next one is our little mini roller coaster, and again this is just when it's getting dark and you can sort of see the little car of the roller coaster moving across the frame. The next one is just one of the rides, and it's just part of the ride's arm up in the air. And the last couple of images from the Supersampler I have to show you are of a moving subject. So this is my dog in the backyard a few years ago. I think this was the very first roll I ever took with my Supersampler on 400 speed film, and here he is racing across the backyard, and so you can see parts of Marshall Dalmatian in each frame here. Really love that. And the next one here, you can sort of see his face close up on the far left one, and then a bit of his collar, then a bit of his face, and then hardly anything of him in the last image. So here I've actually got a moving subject, and I'm moving the camera as well. You sort of end up with all sorts of weird and wonderful images with the Supersampler. So of course there's different techniques of taking images with the Supersampler. You can hold the camera like this, you can hold the camera like that, depending if you want vertical or horizontal panorama images across your frame. Of course you can have a moving subject, you can move the camera either with a static subject or a moving subject. So there's all sorts of little different techniques. You can flick your wrist and move things suddenly and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of creativity you can get up to with the Supersampler, which is why it's such a basic camera, but it's such a fun camera. When I had a look at the Lomography Supersampler website when I was researching this video, there's also a couple of other techniques that I saw on there that were talking about cross-processing film. Of course, that's something I've done quite a lot, and I'm actually keen to get a roll of slide film through here and ask my lab to put it through C41 process. Another technique was shooting the film once through the Supersampler, and then they suggest you rewind the film carefully and you shoot again another load of exposures over the top of your first roll of exposures, which is fantastic. It's a really cool, lomography style thing to do. The only question I have is, how would you line the film up? Because of course, you have your 4 panoramas, and then when you rewind the film, unless you do it exactly how it should be, you're going to get frames overlapping, and I guess that's probably part of the fun and part of the lomography charm of what they're suggesting. However, if you send your film to a lab, I'm not sure how they're actually going to scan your film if all of the exposures are over the top of each other on a multi-lens camera. It sounds like a bit of a nightmare, but if you scan your film at home, perhaps that's something you'd like to try. So in summing up, the Lomography Supersampler is tons of fun. I absolutely adore this camera. I can't wait to shoot another couple of rolls this year through it. I might actually put a roll of old slide film in there and see what I get with that and ask my lab to cross-process it. It really is a lot of fun. I really love using the camera. It's light, it's compact, it takes up no room in my bag, and certainly if I want a bit of variety with images when I'm out and about and I'm shooting, the Supersampler is a great camera to have in your camera bag. What did you think of the Supersampler? I would love to hear your questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the images. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.